Knowing my gift, stories from my life. The knowing, stories from my life. Hello, y'all. I'm Dianna Brianne. I don't give advice, suggestions, information, recommendations. I'm just here for entertainment purposes only. The knowing, the gift. Well, you know, growing up, I have always had this keen ability to sense things. And I call it the knowing. Other people call it something different. I just simply call it the knowing. And for me, it's often had to do with things that I had no way of knowing beforehand. Some of the situations had not even occurred yet, but I had this knowing. Some people call it prophecy. And, but whatever someone chooses to call it, I just call it the knowing. When I just know something. And I've shared with you so many different events in my life that have taken place where I had that knowing beforehand. In one video I did was called How I Met My Husband. I shared with you how that morning prior to meeting him, prior to even knowing he existed, I had an overwhelming knowing that I was meeting my husband that day. I went through the whole day with this overpowering, overwhelming feeling, this sense that this man was standing next to me. And everywhere I looked, there was no man, or if there was a man, it wasn't him. And I went to work that night, and then he walked in. We only spoke for a moment. The next morning, he called me and said, I don't know why I'm going to tell you this, but you're going to be my wife. I said, yes, I know, but call me back in 3 hours when I'm awake. It was the knowing. When my kids were little and we had a house down in Texas, and I told this story called The Miracle House in another video. And in that story, there we had this beautiful, beautiful tree. And I think maybe I'll use it as a thumbnail on this video if I can find it and put it up. It was a beautiful tree. I called it the Tree of Life. Anyhow, about a week before this all happened, or less than a week, I told my husband, we're going to move. And he said, no, we're not. We're not scheduled to move anywhere with his career at the time. We were all settled in. I said, no, we're going to move, but I don't know why. And he said, what? I said, we're going to move. Well, little did I know, a couple days later, my children, who were small at the time, come running in from the yard and said, Mommy, Mommy, there's all kinds of stuff going down the driveway. I looked out, and there was sewage going down the driveway. A pipe had broke deep underneath the house. The tree that had been in the yard, that beautiful tree, the roots had gotten around the pipe and broke the pipe. And so all the maintenance people came and they said, you know what, ma'am, you're going to have to move, but we're going to give you this choice of houses. So if you haven't heard that story, you'll have to go back, and it's called The Miracle House. So I'm not going to go into all the details, but we had to move. We had to move, and it all turned out beautifully because we got a fantastic house. Even though that house was wonderful, we even got one better. And so often I believe that when things happen, it's only to push us forwards, not hold us backwards. But I knew. Now, how in the world would I know that a tree root was going to break a pipe way underneath the house? And so it was the knowing. It was the knowing. And I've had so many, many experiences. Before my mom passed, she'd been sick for quite some time, so there was no reason for me to sense that anything was going to be out of the ordinary. But a few days beforehand, I was sitting on my couch, and she was in the hospital at that time, and I had this knowing. I had this knowing, and it was so surreal. And they called me up at midnight and said, your mom is fixin', as they put it, because we live in the South, fixin' to pass on. And I said, I'll be right over. And I went to go right over, and they called me back and said she had passed on. But I knew something inside of me knew. I knew that knowing. I knew that one of the biggest miracles that ever happened in my life, I knew months before, but I didn't know exactly how it, and actually, I did another video called Roadblocks and Detours, that sometimes in life we'll get roadblocks to slow us down for our blessing because we're moving too quickly, or maybe we're not seeing something. And that was the situation. I had this roadblock, and actually this biggest blessing hadn't even happened yet. And had I been premature in this situation, that blessing would not have happened. But I knew, and it turned out to be the biggest, really, maybe the biggest blessing of my life, although I've had many great blessings in my life. When people have passed, before they've passed, I had one situation where my garage door kept going up and down, up and down, up and down all day, so I had to unplug it. But I knew that day that was, I knew that somebody had passed, and that was in another state. And I contacted, and yes, at that time they had passed. So, you know, and then in a different situation, back when we had faxes and telephones, but we really didn't have much email or anything, we had a big TV that was in the living room, and it was just my one son and I at that time, and there was a family member that was getting ready to go to the other side. They were in another state. And I remember every time I would walk into the living room, the TV would go fuzzy, but the one in the kitchen wouldn't. When I go in the kitchen, the one in the kitchen would go fuzzy, but the one in the living room would be back on. Our phone line went out, so I had to use the fax phone line and plug the phone in that way. It was a very, very electrical type of thing, but it was a knowing. I knew that that person was getting ready to pass in another state, and they did. They did. So I've had a lot of knowing, and much of it's been good. I remember, well, in this one particular one, I remember there were 3 birds that flew in my house. And this was when we lived in what I called the haunted house. So go look up that video called The Haunted House. And there were these 3 huge birds that flew in. And we couldn't get them out for 3 days. And I said, I am going to get an enormous message. And I said an enormous message because these birds were big. One was on the bottom floor. We had 3 levels. One was on the middle floor and one was on the top floor, and we couldn't get them out. And by the 3rd day, I think it was shortly thereafter, I got a huge message, and it was huge. And so, you know, I mean, you may not believe in things like this, and this is, I'm just sharing with you my journey in life and what I believe. And Grandma always taught me birds can bring messages if they get in the house. And so whether that's true or whether it's just a wives' tale or whatever, I've seen it in my own life. And so I've had many situations, wonderful ones as well, where I knew to do something. I knew, like my biggest blessing, or my husband, meeting my husband. I almost didn't go into work that night, and yet I went into work that night. I knew I was going to meet my husband. And so there's knowing, you know, it's just a sense I've always had about me. And so to this very day, I can sense things about people, what's going on in their life. There's a, you know, I can sense so much. And my accuracy is amazing. Sometimes I can be off by a little here, a little there on certain things, but the overall picture is very, very accurate. So I just wanted to share that with you. I do hope you like, share, subscribe to all 5 of my channels. Links are pinned to the top of the comment section below. If you connect with me, I will likely connect with you. If the links are not working, just copy and paste, if you will. So from my house to yours, from my story to yours, may God bless you. And I hope to talk to you soon again. Bye-bye. Porch, a place to relax.